Thanks for showing up to this on a hot summer day. I'm Brian Beauvais. I'm the curator of the County Archives over in Cody, which means I love local history. I love studying local history and making it all accessible to the general public and organized so that when you are interested or have a local history question, you can come into the archives and hopefully we can find an answer for you. And I got interested in Colonel Pickett after reading all of his bear hunting stories. And after reading about him in A.A. Anderson's autobiography, and as an archivist, I like to be familiar with all the sources of local history that I can. And in a lot of early sources and records and narratives, Colonel Pickett, more often than not, just shows up in little snippets here or there without being fully fleshed out about who this guy was. I always found this curious, the fact that there's just never full picture of information about who this guy really was and what the heck he was doing out in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming. It's obvious that he was a renowned bear hunter, but who was this guy in his sort of everyday life and interaction in Wyoming in his non-bear hunting life? He was more than just a one-dimensional famous bear hunter. So in writing this up, I tried to assemble as much info about Pickett as I could find and sort of piece it together to hopefully create a more comprehensive picture of his life and what he was actually doing with his life beyond just hunting bears. Because as a historic resident of this area of Meeteetse, of Park County, of Wyoming, and an interesting and important resident at that, I think he deserves to be remembered for his full humanity and his entire person, not just for his bear hunting activities for a few years of his life. So a quote like this really does a lot more to tell us who Colonel Pickett was than the fact that he killed over 80 bears or something. So, anyway, Colonel Pickett was born in 1827 in Alabama into a very old Virginia family of Picketts. Both of his parents were from Virginia. He was the youngest kid of 5, and he spent his childhood on a cotton plantation in Tennessee, but his father died when he was very young, and his widowed mother moved the family to Lexington, Kentucky, where Pickett would have an association kind of for the rest of his life. Pickett attends Transylvania University there in Lexington, a big feat back in the middle of the 19th century. He graduated in 1845, where he studied land surveying and civil engineering, which will kind of play a role in the rest of his life. He joined a party of railroad surveyors in the middle of nowhere in Texas, straight out of college, and he worked there until the Mexican-American War broke out in 1846. So as a fresh young college grad, Pickett joined a company of Texas Rangers, and they didn't actually fight in the Mexican army or any Mexicans, but they defended against the Comanche out on the frontier. So, I apologize, there's not a lot of pictures of Colonel Pickett, so I kind of just have to insert what might be appropriate. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So after all that fun stuff out on the Texas frontier, he started working as a railroad engineer. He builds railroads around the South. He's mostly focused in Tennessee, Kentucky, and kind of the Ohio River Valley right here. Which in those days, that was sort of cutting-edge technology. The entire United States was trying to get all these railroad lines connected, and Colonel Pickett was kind of on the forefront of that. Now, during the presidential election of 1860, Pickett said he supported the Union Whig Party, which is a way of saying he didn't support the pro-slavery Southern Democrats. He also didn't support Abraham Lincoln's radical anti-slavery Republicans. He's sort of trying to, in retrospect, kind of hedge his bet and saying, well, I was kind of a moderate. I wasn't in favor of secession, but I was also pro-slavery anyways. But upon the outbreak of the Civil War, he sides with what he calls his adopted home states of Tennessee and Kentucky, well, more Tennessee because Kentucky's a middle state. And he raised a company of engineering troops, probably from the guys that he's working with on these railroads, and he serves as their captain. And what they do is they build water batteries along the Mississippi from about Memphis up to Cairo, Illinois, to sort of defend the Mississippi from Union troops. Now, if you know anything about Civil War history, you know that these forts along the Mississippi just get pulverized by Union gunboats coming up from New Orleans and down from the Ohio River Valley, and the Union takes over the Mississippi after the siege of Vicksburg. So after Pickett builds all these defenses, and then they're largely destroyed, he is reassigned to an administrative post with General Hardee, who's a very fun-looking guy here, and he partakes in numerous battles in the Western Theater, Shiloh, Perryville, Murfreesboro, and then the Atlantic Campaign and the evacuation of Charleston. His only injury from war was permanent hearing loss when cannons are exploding right next to his head. He probably wasn't unique in that sense as far as Civil War soldiers go. I mean, a lot of these guys have major hearing loss. And with regard to the Civil War stuff, there are a few issues we need to address I want to clear up. Colonel William Pickett is different from General George Pickett from Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. Two different people, but they are related. They're from the same Pickett, Virginia family. And I haven't done the genealogy, because I'm not a genealogy person, but I've read that they were second cousins. Some sources say they were, that General Pickett was Colonel Pickett's uncle. I don't think that's true. The primary sources say they're second cousins. I've also read in some of our local history books that Colonel Pickett was the private secretary of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, and I don't know where that comes from. That's most likely very not true. I've never seen a primary source that says that. It's only sort of after the fact people kind of writing about this. So in 1866, after the conclusion of the war, Pickett, for some reason, tries his hand at cotton planting down at the Yazoo Delta in Mississippi, but he fails miserably. A flood wipes out all of his crops. I don't know why he did this in the first place, because he's sort of a college-educated railroad engineer. Maybe it's just a lack of options after the war. And then he is appointed as an engineer with the Memphis and Ohio Railroad, which is being constructed after the war. He's probably rebuilding a lot of rail lines that got destroyed during the war. So he's a good person to build these things. He probably built them in the first place. In 1870, he gets married to Theodosia Curd, and they have a son, William Jr. And I think this is where we probably see Colonel Pickett living the life that he was sort of expected to live as a working engineer, building railroads, starting a family, being a successful and contributing member of Southern society. But then his wife dies in 1871, probably of scarlet fever. I've never actually seen what she actually died of. And then his son died in 1874. Again, I'm not really sure how he died. And at this point, it's hard to say what's going on with Colonel Pickett, what he's going through, but it's safe to assume, given the circumstances, that he has some sort of a breakdown which causes him to just flee his old life. I'm not a psychologist. You can call it what you want, a emotional stress or grief or a midlife crisis brought about by a horrible event. But with his wife and child dead, his southern home infested with Yankees, in 1874, Colonel Pickett just takes off. For a while, he kind of goes up to the upper Midwest these are kind of like Colonel Pickett's Jesus is missing years. We kind of don't know exactly what he's doing and what he's up to. He goes to the upper Midwest, and then a few years later he ends up out in Montana and Wyoming. And what he does what you would expect a educated man of means to do out in the middle of nowhere on the frontier. He goes out and explores, hangs out with a bunch of Wild West characters, gets really into bear hunting, does a little prospecting, and has a grand old time among the happiest years of my life. He initially makes his home base in western Montana in the Bozeman area, and every year goes on these big hunting explorations kind of around Bozeman. In 1877, he goes into Yellowstone Park and kills his first grizzly bear, and this was perfectly legal at the time. Hunting wasn't outlawed in Yellowstone until 1883. And then he goes down south for the winter of 1877, 1878, and comes back up to Montana in the spring. And I should say that he doesn't just live in Montana and Bozeman. He's getting around the country all the time. He's sort of itinerant. He's not connected to anywhere. He just comes up to Montana and Wyoming every summer and fall to do his gallivanting around, and then he'll go back down south. But he comes back up to Montana in 1878 and spends the summer hunting and exploring up around the Judith Basin in Montana. In 1879, he goes hunting up in the Crazy Mountains, and then later goes down into Yellowstone and goes hunting up the Clark's Fork, eventually killing a couple bears on Hart Mountain, quote, without any adventure. It's kind of disappointed. And he eventually makes his way back up to Montana and back to Bozeman. The next year, he comes hunting in Yellowstone and kills some elk and bears, and he comes over the Absaroka Divide into the North Fork, where he kills 8 grizzly bears there. And he's amazed at all the strange rock formations and hoodoos that he finds, and he makes a note of seeing the Blackwater Arch, which he's excited about. Pickett and his hunting party eventually make their way down to Marquette under the Buffalo Bill Reservoir, where they run into some cowboys from Carter Ranch and Belknap Ranch who had just that summer brought cattle into the Bighorn Basin. And then they go around Cedar Mountain to the site of future Cody, and they note all the sulfury smell, and why would anyone ever want to live there when this river smells so horrible. And then they go back up to Montana again, like always. In 1881, they come back down to the Bighorn Basin because Colonel Pickett kind of likes what he sees. He likes the fact that there's so much wildlife around here. Up by the area of Clark, he runs into a band of Crow Indians. And in this group, Pickett is surprised to find an African-American guy from Missouri who's living with the Crow, sort of adopted into the Crow tribe, living on their terms. And Pickett finds this peculiar and sort of amusing. And I should note that Pickett always being out here on the frontier in these days, he interacted with plenty of Indians. He tended to get along with a lot of Indians, although later in life he wasn't super keen on Indians leaving their reservations to come hunting in the Bighorn Basin or in his neck of the woods. And they go as far south as Meeteetse Creek and the Greybull, killing 23 grizzly bears. And so I feel like I should mention this, although obviously, like Amy said, Danny's going to give a gun presentation. All of this hunting Pickett is doing, he's using an old Sharps rifle, and he doesn't mention what particular model he's using, but he says he's shooting 40-90 rounds or 44-90 rounds. Kind of says different things. And these old Sharps rifles were single-shot rifles that had been used in the Civil War, but then they became very popular with buffalo hunters out on the plains. They're really powerful shots. They're good at long range, good for buffalo hunting and or bear hunting in Pickett's case. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that, because I'm in no way a firearms historian. Anyway, so he spends the summer and the winter in Bozeman with all of his friends, comes back into the Bighorn Basin and explores and hunts up the Greybull. And Pickett starts saying that he really likes this Greybull area because the whites haven't moved in and contaminated it. And while camping on the Greybull, he kills 19 grizzlies in 1 month. He also finds a site along the river where he hires one of his guides to build him a ranch. And he comes back to this ranch in 1883 and sets up shop and hires Jay Bradley and his wife from the North Fork, who were living at the North Fork at the time, to live with him and sort of be his cook and ranch and help. And an incident occurs that first fall in 1883 that was perhaps Pickett's greatest bear hunting boast. Some cattle had stampeded across a creek near his neighbor Richard Ashworth's ranch, the ZBRT, and a few of these cows are trampled and die. And Pickett knows this is ideal bear bait, so he camps on the carcasses and shoots 4 bears in 1 night. And he says that some surveyors sort of saw him do this and were cheering him on, and they named the creek 4 Bear after the incident. And of course, as a civil engineer and as a veteran, he draws up this battle map laying out the action of all the maneuvers of the bears and the hunter. And we should just address really quick bear hunting in the context of Colonel Pickett's time. A lot of Westerners did not see bears as game animals. They saw them as vermin. And Colonel Pickett is sort of in between Eastern sportsmen who see bears as like the ultimate big game animal, and then native Westerners who just want to get rid of these things. So Colonel Pickett clearly shoots a lot of bears because there's really no inhibition about killing every bear that you see. But he doesn't do it in the way that a lot of native Westerners are doing it. So a lot of native Westerners are using bear traps, whereby you take one of those big leg hole traps. Do you guys have one?
Back in the cabin.
Okay, it's back here. And you tie it to a log, and the bear sort of springs the trap and gets in it, and it can't get away. And then as a hunter, you just show up a few days later and you shoot the bear in the trap. And a lot of native Westerners do this. And a lot of Eastern hunters who come out west are hiring these native Westerners as their guides. And these native Westerners are saying, hey, this is how we shoot bears. So a lot of these Eastern sportsmen take part in this bear trapping, and they write about it in sporting magazines. And then they are roundly criticized as sort of shooting bears in this unsportsmanlike way. But Colonel Pickett is respected as a bear hunter because he does not use traps. He never used traps. But we should acknowledge that he does shoot bears over bait. In this case, a pile of beeves. A bait, whether or not it's sort of, it can be cattle or an elk that he or someone else had recently shot. Now Pickett obviously killed a lot of grizzly bears, probably over 80 that were sort of recorded. And he kills so many bears that in his hunting memoirs, which we'll talk about, most of the bears only warrant a sentence or two. In fact, you can kind of hear him getting bored of killing bears that don't offer any action or excitement or thrill, which is, honestly the vast majority of these things. Because a lot of times you're just like shooting a cow in a field. They're not like charging you or attacking you or anything. There's a few occasions where he does get into some hairy situations. And early bear hunters like Pickett demonstrated their hunting skills by killing lots and lots and lots of bears. But by the 1900s, because people like Pickett were killing so many bears for a long time, it's no longer possible to kill a lot of bears. So given these new circumstances, the definition of the prowess of a bear hunter changes. The ideal goes from killing lots of bears to killing one big, bad, single bear. And for Colonel Pickett and his contemporaries, a bear is a bear. A cub is just the same as a giant boar. It's just a number, it's just a tally. That's how you get to 80. These things are out there to be eradicated. It's just a bear. But this new ideal of sportsmanship shunned excessive killing and for numbers or for profit. And sportsmanship emphasized hunters deliberately taking the more difficult task of focusing on hunting wildlife that challenged their hunting skills and only killing qualified or crafty bears that were worthy opponents. So in this new scheme, killing 100 regular bears pales in comparison to killing a large, mature outlaw bear that had eluded a bunch of hunters for years and years and years. Which is why you guys have two massive bears over here, saying, like, look at how big and bad these bears are, as opposed to a bunch of little sub-adults that that have been hit by a roadkill or something. Like, no one cares about that. Okay, so that's enough about bear hunting. In 1883, Pickett starts working on his ranch, and he devotes significantly less time to hunting and more time to ranching and local politics. So he homesteads on the Upper Greybull near the confluence of Rock Creek, what we call Pickett Creek. This is the original survey from 1884 of that area. This is Pickett's house. It's located right there on what it calls Rock Creek. We call this Pickett Creek if you look on Google Maps or something. Now Pickett Creek, this is labeled as Pickett Creek. It's now called Four-Bear Creek. This is Four-Bear Creek. This is where Colonel Pickett had done his 4-bear killing in one night. We now call this Rose Creek. This is where Richard Ashworth, who was an early rancher, a English remittance man, started the ZBRT Ranch. This is the headquarters of the Pitchfork now. And then this is Frank's Fork, and thank God it's still called Frank's Fork. I don't know how all these things got mixed around. This is like land surveyors that sort of mixed these four things around. Also, if you're familiar with local history, John Gleaver has a house right there. He was another early rancher. These are all just pastures and fields now. And he calls his ranch Four-Bear from the incident of killing 4 bears. He also has a post office at the site, sort of a central hub. And he builds a small footbridge. Oh, sorry, this is the modern Pickett's Creek. Four-Bear Creek's down here, Frank's Fork, Rose Creek. And he builds a footbridge across the river at his ranch, which was important in those days. If you're trying to get across, I mean, we have a swollen river right here. If you're trying to get across that, it's going to be pretty dangerous. So everyone sort of has to funnel through Colonel Pickett's ranch to get across the upper river. And he raises Hereford thoroughbred Hereford beef. His brand is the Ramshorn brand Double Reverse J. And he interacts with his neighbors. He seemed to get along with most people. This is a picture that I found in the archives. It's ID'd as this being Nathan Rush, who was an early ranch manager in the Upper Greybull, and then Colonel Pickett. I'm not going to stake my life on the accuracy of this identification, but given the few other Colonel Pickett photos we have, this looks like it could be him. Otto Frank's diary, another nearby rancher from the Pitchfork, regularly mentions visiting Colonel Pickett and Colonel Pickett visiting him. So, the few neighbors that you have back in those early days, you visit them on a regular basis. And from what I read, Colonel Pickett's ranch was very small and primitive. He did not have a fancy, extensive log cabin system. And that might have been because it burns down in 1893 and he just doesn't want to rebuild anything. I don't know. Maybe he just doesn't care. He just likes living in a log cabin. And I should clarify, his Wyoming ranch is not really his full-time residence. He regularly winters down south, sometimes even as far as Mexico. He goes down to Mexico for the winter. He's a snowbird. And a lot of these ranchers were snowbirds. Otto Frank winters in California. Richard Ashworth, his neighbor, goes back to England every winter. These people travel more than I do, frankly. So this idea of lonely frontiersmen living out, in some cabin in the middle of nowhere, and they're so lonely and they never get around. That sort of stereotype doesn't always ring true. These guys travel a lot. He is elected, this is Colonel Pickett right here. He is elected as a state representative from Fremont County in 1888. He was a Democrat of the Old South, and there was a lot of Democratic leanings in the Bighorn Basin in northwest Wyoming back in those days. His Republican opponent was his neighboring rancher friend, Otto Frank. And it seems like they got along, they had Thanksgiving dinner together, but maybe there was a little bit of a underlying rivalry, friendly rivalry between the two guys. Now he gets elected a second time in 1890, and then he's elected as the state senator, as a state senator from Bighorn County. And as I hope you all know, Pickett is credited with creating Bighorn County. Now, Bighorn County was created by Pickett and the territorial legislature in 1890, which means it just exists on paper, but it wasn't fully organized until 1897. But still, a lot of that, Pickett deserves a lot of credit for that. And this creation of Bighorn County is important for our neck of the woods, because prior to 1897, if anyone in the Bighorn Basin has any sort of governmental business to do, whether it be water issues, taxes, assessments, homestead filings, legal issues, going to court, they have to go all the way down to Lander, which is a heck of a trip to make on horseback or on bumpy wagon. And as also naturally the case due to geography, the Bighorn Basin is kind of the backwater of Fremont County, because all the governmental energy and money is down in the Wind River. So the formation of Bighorn County sort of allows the Bighorn Basin to develop on its own terms and not have to rely on whatever people down in Lander and Riverton want to throw up here. There's Bighorn County. So Bighorn County was created from Fremont County and then part of Johnson County over here. And people are very happy about this, and they honor Colonel Pickett. They throw in parties. He's a popular guy. Colonel Pickett is also pro-silver. It's one of his big policies. And this was the policy of coining silver back in the late 1800s. And this was a populist policy that was thought to be good for Western silver miners. So it was very popular in the Rocky Mountains. It was also thought to be popular for little guys, for small farmers and ranchers who were heavily indebted. And it was thought that this sounds weird to say right now, it was thought that the high inflation would be good for these heavily indebted people, because they could more easily pay off their debts with a more abundant money supply that would result from coining silver. And that's a sort of populist democratic thing that Pickett's into. They're pro-silver Republicans. Part of a section of the Republican Party is pro-silver, and then a lot of Democrats are. Pickett also writes about his political involvement in the state with women's suffrage, which he is very in favor of. And all of this involvement in politics is important because Colonel Pickett is one of the first politicians in Wyoming to really get the ball moving on this novel concept of wildlife conservation. As a hunter, he was seeing wildlife populations getting more sparse, and he knew if no one did anything about it, they would all be completely gone soon, because he had been around to watch buffalo be taken off the landscape, and he didn't want to see that with elk and bighorn sheep as well. In 1890, Pickett writes a bill, a package of new game laws, including things like outlawing the sale or transportation of hides, making it illegal to kill more than 3 big game animals in 1 week. So, I mean, obviously they're not too strict about this. Banning all non-residents from hunting in Wyoming, which probably didn't go, that was pretty strict, that didn't go over very well. Creating fines and punishments for poachers, and also allowing for local justices of the peace to appoint special game constables to police poachers and game violators. Back in 1877, before Pickett was elected to political office, he and a few neighboring ranchmen on the Greybull created the Wyoming Game Protective Association as a way to protect local game populations and enforce game laws. Now, at this time, Wyoming Territory did not have hunting seasons. Oh, sorry, they did have hunting seasons and some other regulations, but they didn't have any game wardens. So there was no way to actually, for the state to enforce these laws. So these guys, by employing a game constable, just sort of took enforcement into their own hands. And this really works well. It drives out a lot of market hunters from coming into the Bighorn Basin. Founded by Colonel Pickett and then Archibald Rogers, who was a wealthy railroad magnate from New York. He had an estate on the Hudson, neighboring the Roosevelt complex. And he was partly interested in the TL Ranch, sort of below, on the Greybull, below Meeteetse. And then another one of his partners, Thomas Payton, who was another East Coast sportsman. And then, of course, Otto Frank of the Pitchfork, who was the local justice of the peace. And these guys publicized what they were doing so as to deter hunters from coming into northwest Wyoming, both market hunters and just parties of sportsmen who just come into the basin and kind of run roughshod over all the game animals in the area. And apparently this has the desired effect. A lot of people leave. A lot of the hunters that would have come down from Billings sort of go other places. But wildlife conservation doesn't always make Colonel Pickett a lot of friends. A. Anderson tells the story of coming out to Wyoming on a hunting trip in the 1890s, and he actually has dinner with Colonel Pickett at his ranch, which must have been awkward for a Confederate soldier and a New York Yankee to be sitting down having dinner together. And as Anderson is leaving, Pickett tells him he can't go hunting up the Greybull because non-residents aren't allowed to go hunting in Wyoming. If Anderson wants to go hunting, he has to go over the Stinking Water. And presumably, Colonel Pickett says, that's in Wyoming too. So it doesn't really make any sense. Colonel Pickett just doesn't want people hunting around his neck of the woods. Anyway, Anderson is a New York aristocrat who's not used to being bossed around by anyone, much less someone who lost the Civil War. So he goes up the Greybull anyway, and Pickett sends a game warden after him, one of these game constables. And it doesn't seem like anything came of it, but perhaps it's not a great way to make the acquaintance of your new neighbor. Because Anderson later builds a ranch up on Piney Creek above Colonel Pickett's ranch, and these two neighbors have this seething resentment of one another, even though they should have been really good friends, because they're both in tune with this wildlife conservation, protecting the landscape, all that fun stuff. But who knows, perhaps Colonel Pickett made more enemies than just A. Anderson, because he might have gotten on the wrong side of too many local people as well, because he ends up losing the election of 1896. And again, no comment on local issues. It's a contested election. It ends up being a court case. Colonel Pickett initially thinks that he won and he's in office for a year. And then it's found that he sued, and they do a recount and all that fun stuff. And you can see that, like, oh, he got illegal votes, and Burlington, he got like 26 votes, whatever. He ends up losing and being taken out of office. But Colonel Pickett still has a heck of a lot going on. Maybe all this work for game conservation makes it no surprise that he was a charter member of the Boone and Crockett Club. And he is renowned in this early hunting magazine, a lot of these early hunting magazines, as this frontier gentleman grizzly hunter. He's known nationally for that. Here he is right here. His friend Archibald Rogers, also of the Meeteetse area, is also on this list. You know, with like Theodore Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell and all that fun stuff. So it's interesting that, you know, a guy living in Podunk, middle of nowhere, Wyoming, is on a charter member list of the Boone and Crockett Club, which is a pretty big deal. Again, it's also a testament of the circles that Colonel Pickett is moving in, the social circles, nationally. He's not just associating with cowboys. This guy goes to New York City and has these fancy dinners with Theodore Roosevelt and George Bird Grinnell. And in fact, the Boone and Crockett Club publishes this book, Hunting at High Altitude, which is largely composed of Pickett's hunting memoirs from the 1870s and 1880s before he settles down on his ranch. And again, Pickett recounts killing so many bears, one after another, to the point where he hardly even bothers to provide any details for bears that don't provide any excitement. And you can read this online. I think it's available as a PDF on Google Books if you want to look into it. Pickett also writes on a lot of other topics other than bear hunting. As early as 1880, before he settles down on the Greybull, he's writing articles for Forest and Stream, which was sort of the premier outdoor magazine edited by George Bird Grinnell of the Boone and Crockett Club. And Colonel Pickett's writing about just the outdoor scene, the hunting scene out west, sort of as a western frontier correspondent for Forest and Stream. And I think one of Colonel Pickett's greatest contributions to early wildlife conservation was his observation that market hunting was a major cause of the declining wildlife numbers. And certainly he wasn't the only person to sort of realize this relationship, but the fact that he was out here and he lived here gave him a much better understanding of the situation than wealthy sportsmen back east who sort of just came out here every now and again and sort of might see a professional hunter. And as an engineer and a surveyor, Pickett was clearly a smart guy. He was a scholarly guy. He did all this writing. He also loved tinkering and experimenting and learning. He did his own experiments with ballistics, bullet loads, and published these in Forest and Stream. He also writes articles about exploring early Yellowstone and the Absarokas, sort of like this, I went here and no one else was here, this is what I saw sort of thing, back when Yellowstone was still sort of a remote place that it was hard to get to. And then he writes, you know, things as random as birds on his ranch, because he was clearly an intelligent guy, just a curious guy with a wide array of interests from politics, to hunting, and ballistics, and natural history, and bird watching, and ranching, and raising thoroughbred cattle. He was a smart guy. He wasn't just a bear hunter that loved to shoot stuff. And Pickett produces a lot of his own writing, but he also appears in the writing of other folks. In 1900, the nature writer Ernest Thompson Seton publishes a book, The Biography of a Grizzly, which takes place here in northwest Wyoming around Yellowstone. And in this book, he casts Colonel Pickett as an evil bear-murdering rancher. In this story, Colonel Pickett kills the mother and three, you can see their murdered bodies right here. He kills the mother and three siblings of the Wob, the title bear character. And this relates to Colonel Pickett's famous account of killing 4 bears in one night at the 4-bear ranch. And Seton's story was sort of a snide way to disrespect that story by saying that the 4 bears he killed were this harmless mother and then three infants. And Pickett clearly did kill a lot of bears and a lot of bear cubs, but he wasn't an evil guy. He wasn't a bloodthirsty guy. That was the context in which he was hunting bears. In those days, people just saw bears as needed to be thinned out. People really don't concern themselves with the fact that they're killing bear cubs. Again, they're just numbers. But Seton probably cast Colonel Pickett in this bad light because he was a friend and a guest of A.A. Anderson, Pickett's neighbor and rival, and Anderson was probably disparaging Pickett to Seton enough that the author just made him the villain, the easy villain. So in 1904, Pickett moves back to Lexington, Kentucky, and the reason he gives that he wants to be near his older sister. I think he had a brother living in Lexington as well. There probably might have been a few factors that brought about this move. Otto Frank, his neighbor, died in December of 1903 from an accidental gunshot, or depending on what you believe, he was sort of assassinated by somebody who didn't like him, because he had been making enemies among sheepmen and disgruntled cowboys. So there's that. Also, his neighbor, Richard Ashworth, the other rancher from the Z-Bar-T, had died in 1899 while on a boat in the Mediterranean, and his ranch was sold to the Phelps family. So it's unclear what prompted Pickett's move, but perhaps the fact that his longtime neighbor just died in this weird gunshot, and a new neighbor moved next door and perhaps made comments about wanting to buy Pickett's ranch. And Pickett was just getting old, and ranch life is hard and it requires a lot. And things were changing on the Upper Greybull. The days of open range cattle ranching were over, and people were moving in, and fences were moving in, and sheepmen were moving in, and it just wasn't the same as when Colonel Pickett got there. So Pickett moves back to Lexington and lives the life of a retired Southern gentleman. He does occasionally go back to Wyoming, and he is sort of part of the social scene of Cody for a while. He goes to County Club meetings, and everyone's like, oh, the famous bear hunter Colonel Pickett is back. Everyone thinks it's wonderful. He lives in a house with his siblings. I sort of creepily found that house on Google Maps. It's a nice house.
Yes.
In 1917, he gets sick and slowly kind of withers away. He has some sort of issue with his throat and esophagus, where there's a sac growing in his esophagus, and it becomes a big endeavor for him to just eat anything. So obviously hard when you're old, obviously hard in 1917 when medical things aren't as advanced as they are today. And he dies a short time after, and was buried in the Lexington Cemetery. He was 89. He also had a brother who was living with his brother. His brother was mostly bedridden, and he was 92 years old. So, and of course the news is published in Kentucky and Wyoming. It's also published nationally in Forest and Stream, which again sort of testifies to how well known Colonel Pickett is nationally. Because this guy was known far and wide in his day, especially in the hunting world. He wasn't a celebrity, quite the celebrity of Buffalo Bill, but he was widely known amongst a lot of people. People from Bozeman, in the Bighorn Basin, people in Kentucky, in Virginia, in New York, a lot of early travelers and hunters that come into the area. They know about Colonel Pickett and his exploits. I like to read a lot of early hunting accounts, and a lot of these people, when they're on the South Fork or something, they mention, oh, I know that Colonel Pickett's ranch is just over the mountain range. Even if they've never met Colonel Pickett, they just know of him. Which is, again, a testament to a guy living in the middle of nowhere in Wyoming. So why is it that hardly anyone knows who this guy is today? I feel like, we probably all know, but we're kind of a biased audience here. If you went outside and just flagged someone down over at the gas station and said, who's Colonel Pickett? I don't think that they would know, or they might have only the vaguest idea that maybe he was a rancher on the river at some point back in the olden days. And I guess, not everyone's notoriety stands the test of time. Buffalo Bill had a private organization whose job it was to keep his memory alive. And this is an important topic to talk about in a local history museum. The fact that commemoration is an active endeavor. It takes work. It doesn't always just occur organically. It doesn't just naturally fall out of the sky. And Pickett is a great example of someone who was widely known in his day, but whose notoriety did not endure. If it wasn't for Pickett Creek and for Bear Creek, any memory of the fact that this guy lived here would be entirely erased from our local landscape. The location of his ranch is a cow pasture. It's a field. And if you weren't familiar with local history, you would never know that someone lived there, that a famous person lived their life in a cow pasture that's full of cow patties. When the Phelps family bought the Pickett Ranch, they did move his little cabin over to the Z-Bar-T, and I've been told it's still standing over there. A few weeks ago, Lennox Baker and I toured the place. Lennox is the owner of the Pitchfork. Colonel Pickett's cabin is now the living room of the ranch manager house at the Z-Bar-T. It's been added on to a bunch over the years, but you can see how it's sort of the rustic character. Obviously, they put a bunch of doors in it and stuff. And at the old site of the ranch on Pickett Creek, the only thing that exists today is an old shed. The ranch uses it as a cabin shed. And Lennox and I weren't even sure if this had anything to do or dated to the time period of Colonel Pickett, or if it was just of later construction. But after studying the thing, we noticed how old some of this lumber was right here, as opposed to this more modern milled lumber. You can see how, obviously the roof is more contemporary, but these old beams are just sort of crudely cut out of logs. But we also did notice that there were notches in some of these beams right here, suggesting that it might have been just reused lumber from something else to then repurposed in this cattle shed. So who knows if this had anything to do with Colonel Pickett? I don't know. This is the only thing that is even out on his what was his ranch back then. Anyway, so that's Colonel Pickett. I would also just notice that this is a Confederate flag pin. So he was always a Southern sympathizer, even in his old days. Maybe a little bit more so when he moved back to Lexington and lived his life there. That's all I have. That's all we know about Colonel Pickett. That's all I know about Colonel Pickett. If anyone else has any sort of facts or information, I would love to hear it. So thanks for showing up.